What?
Is there any changes in the grant status associated with that?
We're good to go.
Okay. I call to order the Oconee County Conservation Bank Board. It's 9 o'clock. We have present Andy Smith, Scuddy Walker, Steve McCurry, and Emily Hitchcock. We have a quorum. The first order of business is the election of officers. We have a proposed slate of officers for next year. That would be Emily Hitchcock as chair, Scuddy Walker as vice chair.
Is this a motion?
No, I'm going to ask for a motion, and I'm telling you, okay.
All right, I'm sorry.
Okay. The proposed slate is Emily Hitchcock as chair, Scuddy Walker as vice chair, Andy Smith as treasurer, and Ryan Keese as secretary. Do I have a motion?
I so move.
Uh,
To
A second?
nominate that slate.
Yes.
I'll second that.
A second from Steve, so we have Andy Smith made the motion, Steve made the second. Is there any discussion?
Is it Scott?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're fine.
You'll have to forgive me, Scott. Thank you, Andy.
I've been called worse.
Okay, but is there any discussion? Okay, if there's no discussion, everybody in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nobody opposed. The motion passes unanimously. The next order of business is the approval of the minutes. Ryan is not here. Everybody got their minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion.
Second.
Okay, motion by Scott, second by Scuddy. Any discussion? No discussion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No opposed. It passes unanimously. Okay. The next item of business is the proposed meeting dates. We have, the proposed meeting dates are April the 4th, May the 2nd, August or 9th. So we're going to need to discuss this. I believe the 4th, 2nd, and 8th, I believe everything except the 9th and 15th is the first Tuesday of the month. The 9th and 15th would be the second Tuesday. Does anyone have a preference on those dates?
Can we do the 9th on the second Tuesday of the month?
Of the second Tuesday in May, which would be the 9th?
And my preference would be the second.
Okay.
So
Okay, well, is April the 4th okay?
April 4th is fine.
Okay, May the 9th, what about the
And so I
August?
wouldn't be able to make the 9th. I can make the second. That's all for me.
Well,
But I
he,
could
Oh.
come May 9th. I could come May 2nd.
he has a position on the chair, so I'll concede and go to the second on that one. That's
Okay.
fine.
It's only
You
because
can make the second, but
That's
not
right.
the 9th.
It's only because
It's
I
good.
can't make the 9th.
It's good
Okay.
for me.
Okay, so
We'll go second.
the second. Now, in August, the 8th and 15th, on that one, I would like the 8th. If we go with the 15th, Scuddy will have to chair.
Eight's good with me.
Okay, is the
That's
8th
fine.
okay?
Yeah.
8th sounds good.
And then we have September 5th. That's okay. November the 14th, December the 5th, and then February the 6th of 2024. Okay, so the proposed dates are April 4th, May the 2nd, August the 8th, September the 5th, November the 14th, December the 5th, and February the 6th, 2024. Do I have a motion to adopt those dates?
Motion.
Uh,
I'll second it.
Okay, motion by Andy, second by Scott. Any more discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. It's approved unanimously. The next item is the treasurer's report. Andy?
Okay, so this is from the State Carolina Office of State Treasurer, the local government investment pool account that we have. And this is for the period of January 1st, 2023 through January 31st, 2023. On the first, we had a beginning balance of $284,205.40. On the 31st, we had a balance of $285,308.97. So we had a reinvestment of interest income of $1,103.57 in January. Year to date, we've had, it's hard to believe, but we've had $5,396.89 in interest income. So, I don't see how that's possible. It just doesn't seem right. So if January is 1,000, how do you get to 5396? But it says year to date and it says month to date.
Well, Andy, some of our months, when the market was extremely low, we didn't make much interest.
No, I understand that, but you see what I'm saying?
No.
January was $1,103. This is February 7th. Year to date is $5,396.
So year-to-date wasn't last year?
It just says year to date. I would assume
Okay.
we're talking about this year. Nonetheless, that's what it says.
Okay.
We know what the beginning is and what the ending was.
Well,
That's
do we need to wait to approve those at the next meeting while you can check that out?
I'd be happy to.
Well, the market went in the dump in the fall, so
Yeah,
I mean,
but-
it's a
But so
net.
that doesn't matter. This is interest year to date.
For
from January 1st to
2023.
February 7th. And there's a $4,000 difference between January 31st and February 7th. That doesn't seem possible.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Okay.
I'd like to get in on that.
Okay.
Something in on that.
So,
So you want to just hold off on that?
okay, do I have are you making a motion to defer the approval of the state pool report until
Yeah.
next month?
Yeah.
Okay, so Andy has made a motion to defer the approval of the state pool report, bank report, investment. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
A second from Ryan. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? None opposed. It passes unanimously. And Jennifer, my notes were that Ryan joined the meeting at 9:05.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Andy, if you'd like to
Yep,
continue?
I will. And I'll just say in discussion that, it just seems too good to be true. So this is the Treasurer's Report Community First Bank Account, period ending December 31st, 2022. Opening balance, $4,041, $500 deposit from Laura. Expenditures, 0. Balance ending December 31st, 2022, $4,541.
Okay, is that the final report, the
That's
rest of it?
the final
Okay. Are you making a motion
I
to
move that
approve?
we accept this report.
Okay. Okay, motion by Andy, second by Ryan.
No,
Scott,
Scott,
you're fine.
this is the reason I say it, because who can recognize your voices? Okay, any discussion? No, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. The fundraising report, Ryan, in public relations?
have no updates.
Okay, we had the donation from Laura on the donations, but there's been nobody's going out trying to do fundraising.
No.
Okay. The grant status report, Scotty?
No changes.
No changes, okay. And Mr. Root,
Yes, ma'am.
we have a presentation. I think you are going to answer some questions the board
Well,
has.
yeah, I think presentation is probably an overstatement, but there were a few questions that were posed to me by Ms. Hitchcock by email, and if there's others, I'll be glad to do my best to answer them. The first was the reason why the required deed language no longer contains a reference to board policies and procedures. I don't know if that's germane now. Part of that will be discussed when we talk about the policies that you all have put in place and modified over the course of time. But actually, as to requiring deed language, That was amended during your last round of amendments to the ordinance that struck the deed language requirement and instead just went with, if you're gonna award grant funds for a fee simple purchase, you're gonna have to put a conservation easement on it. That's the way the ordinance reads now. So the deed language notion is essentially moot. There was, and this, I guess, segues into your policy questions. I think the genesis of this question was you all had some robust language that you wanted to put in on deeds, and there was some confusion or conflict about whether or not that should be done. And it goes to what I'm going to say about the policy questions after this. Any policies that you all have really need to track with the ordinance as closely as they can, unless they're just purely ministerial, administrative policies. Anything outside and above that, when you start doing shalls and mandatory required language for applicants, then you're kind of usurping the legislative authority that the county council has, and so you're going outside your bailiwick. So, as a general statement, at this point, it's not relevant. I'm not sure if I'm hitting that question, because that's my first written down response was I'm not sure what the question is referring to. But I know that the amendment language that we put forth in June of 2022 struck that notion of trying to get any kind of language in a deed that's going to carry any fulsome conservation principles with it. You know, conservation easements are pretty robust documents. You're not going to find those in deeds for the most part. You know, I'm not a conservation environmentalist attorney, but I know that, you know, I'm familiar with conservation easements, and they're very thick, cover all the bases documents, and you don't see that in deeds. You'll see references, certainly in deeds, to those documents. So I think I wasn't here when y'all decided to strike the deed language, but I'm guessing that you wanted to go with, if you're going to do a fee simple grant, that you want to ensure that there's a conservation easement in place now.
And that's correct. I mean, the conservation easement's the best way to ensure that it'll be preserved as conservation property. And we were just, when we were doing fee simple transfers, approving those only, there's no language in the deed. And so we were trying to make that stronger. And I thought we had the ordinance language that we created, that we were kind of tracking in that, in what we wrote in there about our policies, in the deed language that we've now struck.
Yeah.
We did make
Okay.
changes to the ordinance, I think, that broadened our scope just a little bit.
Yeah. Well,
But maybe not
we
that
can
far.
go back and look at that history, but as
Yeah.
Mr.
We've-
Reed said,
we've
it
solved the
is
problem with the
moot,
requirements.
so
Yeah, that's right.
I think
Yep.
what's in the past deed languages, of course, are correct under the ordinance under which they were, the grants were issued, and we'll just move forward.
Yep.
If they ever,
Yep.
if county council, for whatever reason, decides to go backwards, then that issue can be explored. Okay,
All right, yes, ma'am. The next, if I may, Madam Chair, the next item was, since only the first post-award transfer of the property interest purchased using grant money is subject to board approval, will the board be able to recommend an enforcement action to council if the conservation purposes are not being met in the future? And I think that question contains the answer. If you all find out, as to any particular property that there's a conservation easement, if that the county is holding by some means, or some third party is holding, and you know that that's being violated, or any of the principles that are contained within the ordinance are being violated at any step of the way, you would note that, perhaps have a discussion about it, ensure that you feel comfortable that that's going on, and then you could pass it along to Jennifer, she could pass it along to me, that your recommendation is to county council that they investigate and pursue enforcement. But just remember, I think we've had discussion before, y'all are not an entity, you're not a thing, that can pursue litigation. County council, or county is, and county council is the governing body of county council. So you can make that recommendation to county council, then I would have that discussion most likely in executive session. And if county council says, yeah, some entity is violating the terms of a conservation easement, or a deed, or a grant agreement, or what have you, David go and pursue, is likely gonna be injunctive relief, most likely, could be some damages, I suppose, saying, all right, we're gonna make them do right, make them follow the contours of the relevant agreement. So it would be recommendation from y'all to county council, could come through Jennifer, could come through me. I know I don't usually attend these meetings, Jennifer is here, so she could pass it along to me, and then I would get it on the county council agenda, and we'd talk about it there.
Yeah, I understand that, that makes sense. It begs the question though, so going along in time, I mean, how are we gonna know? I mean, it's in an eligible entity's hands and the private landowner's hands. Our only knowledge would be that we know there's an easement on this project, on this property that maybe we're involved in, but we haven't given ourselves any kind of, well, let's just keep an eye on them, folks. It's just be a casual
Well,
occurrence that you saw that there was something going on.
as a practical matter, first, if there is a conservation easement, which going forward will be every property, then the entity, the grantee that accepted the funds in the grant agreement, because it's in the ordinance, I believe, we'll have to double check, is required to let the board know if they identify, and they have to make the annual
Annual
visits.
inspection.
What?
Annual inspection is.
The
normally
annual
planned.
inspections. So that's how we would know if there's a conservation easement. The more significant issue is where it's a fee simple, because at least to date, the county, it's my understanding, does not have the manpower to do annual visits. And I just will remind you that that is one of the reasons why the change was proposed, because that is an expense. And I think we have 5 properties now. I don't have the list with me that have fee simple only. So those would be the 5 properties that,
But I'm thinking about even a conservation easement scenario, you know, I mean, the scenario may be that the eligible recipient finds out that that private property owner is violating the easement. They may knock on the county's door and say, hey, you wanna jump in on this with us?
well, they are
That-
required to.
Yeah, that would be
They're
how
required
it
to
would
let
get
us
to
know,
us.
I believe.
Yeah, okay.
Well,
Well, let's make sure, because
Okay.
otherwise it's, you know, there's no mechanism for us to even look.
Yeah, why don't you investigate that and report back at the
Dang,
next,
I wasn't signing up.
well, we're making a note to put it on the agenda that you are going to report back on whether or not the grant agreements, ordinance, or grant agreement, or both, require the grantee, which is the eligible recipient, to notify the county if there is a violation of the conservation easement.
Okay, will do.
And Madam Chair, if I could? just
Yes,
touch on
thank
that-
you.
On that topic, you're absolutely right. The county does not have the people power to enforce, at this point, in my opinion, conservation easement terms and to police that, so to speak. And if you have a third party, a natural land upstate, or somebody who is in that business of doing it, it's gonna be more effective at this juncture. So, that's just, as you look at grants you're gonna approve in the future, and, you know, how are you going to ensure that those conservation easements or whatever are enforced? Thinking of third-party entities who are in the business of doing that is a good route to go. The other questions related to policies that I believe y'all are in the process of reworking. One was to, this is 03, the grant procedures, and 05, which was property interest transfer. Again, I went over these yesterday. It's a little bit more than the cursory review that I gave them, but I didn't have time to fully study them. But I would give the general overarching statement, and I'm not saying that you don't need any policies, but for the most part, we've got a number of different boards and commissions, and very few of them have bylaws, policies outside of what's in the ordinance. The reason for that is because of the legislative delegation concept that I spoke of. If it's in the ordinance, it doesn't necessarily need to be in a policy. And if it's not in the ordinance, it probably shouldn't be in a policy. There are exceptions to that. If there's something that's ministerial in nature, administrative in nature, that's gonna be good to put in there to help an applicant, help somebody, and our departments have these that aren't in an ordinance. Planning, building codes, all of these have policies and procedures, just gonna help somebody navigate the path through, then that's great. But if it's gonna add to the process some requirement that is not in the ordinance, and make it, like I say, a shall or shall not, what have you, then you want to be very careful with that. I think, looking at, just as an example, the grant procedures, you have each application must meet the applicable minimum score recommended for a grant award. And then you have, and you can, please correct me if I'm wrong, again, this may be a lack of study. I know that there's a scoring process that's spoken of within the ordinance, but it doesn't delineate the particularities like you do here. Here you say, must meet the applicable minimum score, and then you have farmland at 30, in-holding land at 22, non-farmland at 40, solely historical cultural land at 21. Those can essentially be your guidelines on how you're gonna do it, but say that those are mandatory. I think that goes in excess of what the ordinance is. It's a close call. It's not saying that, you have to do something that's not in the ordinance, because you're saying, this is our scoring. But that is somewhere, that's the kind of thing that you need to be careful about.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I mean, we certainly wouldn't want to put our scoring mechanism in the ordinance.
No,
We want to have the ability to change it over time. But yeah, maybe just make it a little softer than shalls.
I think the shalls and the shall nots, and changing those when you're using it to, hey, folks, these are generally what we're using, so these are recommended, these are the general policies that we employ or follow. They're not rigid. Language like that can keep you out of that.
so using that
Great.
specific
Problem area.
example, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Using that specific example, could we say, unless the board decides otherwise, it's planned, and you don't want to use will or shall. The board's intention is to use the below score, because I think the applicants need to know how we're looking at their applications, so that they can look at them and hopefully, based on their evaluation, know whether or not they're going to meet the applicable minimum score. Now, we may have as a collective board, may have a different analysis, but still, I think that they need some guidelines about whether or not it's worth submitting an application. And I also know that, and part of the reason we put this in came from me after I read the audit report of the State Conservation Board, because one of the things the state auditor said was they had no criteria for when they had this beautiful scoring system, but then they just kind of, this one, oh, we like this one we don't, and they didn't have any minimum scores or whatever. So,
What you might want to do is just reference the section where it talks about the scoring that's in the ordinance. And say in relation to 2 dash, I'm not pulling it up right now, but 404, whatever. The
okay,
board is required to score the applications. Currently, the board generally follows these scoring parameters.
okay, generally
So
follows.
so you're giving a
Okay.
heads up to them of what your thinking is, and then some, just escape clause in there says, this is, like I say, not rigid, it's not mandatory that you make these, because then you don't want to hem yourself in either. And there's certainly, gonna be farmland that you want to grant something for, it's a piece of 25, I don't know. So,
Yeah.
not boxing yourself in and making it something that's a legislative requirement. is-
Our applicants are so wild, they're so sly and crafty. that, That's why you want to say shall. And I'm just teasing. It's not true.
Okay, yeah, that's a good suggestion, and when we get to the discussion of the policies on the agenda, the board itself, perhaps we'll just have a motion to send them back out for redrafting and look at every shall and must in it to begin with, and also make sure that things that are explicit in the ordinance and not required are not in there, and that everything else is ministerial. So those are really the three things we need to look at.
And feel free to send those to me afterward, and like I said, in my mind, generally, I don't know how this all, I'm not here, like I say, here all the time, so I don't know how it operates on a day-to-day basis, but the less policy is probably the better, but that's from my particular point of view, because that's the less things that you could violate.
Okay,
I think the problem is having attorneys on the board.
It really is a problem.
yes.
Anywhere they are, it's a problem.
And also, I think that last review, for all the shells and everything, I think that's a new guy job.
I'm sorry, I'm not an attorney.
You just said that was a
How
good
much you
thing.
can read.
Who said I could read?
So, does that sufficiently cover the policy questions? I mean, we'll get, I suppose, in a kind of a revision phase after you rewrite them, I'll take a look at them down the road, to see what you churn out at that point in time, if there's anything that's concerning.
Okay,
Those were the questions that I had on my email. So like I say, it may have fallen short of a presentation, but hopefully that was helpful.
And David, I missed, because I missed a lot of meetings last year, the discussion about our policy of being able to approve a subsequent, a transfer later on. Do we have any power in that regard?
What's written in the ordinance, it comes to you also, I'm not quoting the language directly, but if it's eligible to eligible, then it's a majority vote. I think, so if you're gonna say, hey, this is gonna be a supermajority vote by policy, or this is gonna be unanimous by policy, or I think the thing was, you have to put the application in 6 months prior to the anticipated transfer, must. Those are things that would be violative of the ordinance, because it doesn't require those, and those are more than just an administrative thing. Back to the 6-month example, if you're saying, hey, we would love, not the wording you use, but we'd love to get these applications within 6 months because we only meet, periodically, whatever, this will give us time to fully think about it, it's gonna be helpful. So you put that notice out there to the public, but to say something like it's gonna be barred if they don't get it within 6 months, then that would be outside the contours of the ordinance, the law.
What if part of the presentation on the proposed transfer is something that we really feel violates the spirit of the ordinance? Can we say, nope, not gonna approve it?
Well, I think generally, if y'all are in the position of approving the request and you're doing it's going eligible to eligible, it's not an extinguishment, and it's just a majority vote, then yeah, I mean, you're gonna consider everything that you consider now. So if y'all, someone's gonna applies to make an eligible to eligible transfer, and y'all have a discussion, you don't think it's in the spirit, you think whatever's going wrong, wonky to use a term my kids would use, that you vote it down. Certainly, if an applicant is offended by that decision, they may take it up the line. Usually that's gonna be to a county council member, then it's gonna find its way on the county council agenda, then county council is that governing body of the county as an entity, is gonna make a decision, thereafter. Sometimes that decision would be to say, hey, the board is the ones to make this majority vote decision. They said no, there's nothing we can do about that, there's nothing we're gonna do about that, or, maybe the board shouldn't be making this decision because we don't like the way this went, and so we're gonna rewrite the ordinance there. Because that is something that you gotta be mindful of. County council can make some swift by one vote actions, but anything that would really substantively change the ordinance has to happen by another ordinance, so.
So, we have the ability to say no, it's just whether or not that sits well with the eligible, with the new parties essentially, or at least one of the new parties, and then they would they could come back and say, come on, guys. But they ultimately can appeal to the county councils.
Right, I think there's not a body written in there, who the appeal would go to, as I recall. So in any of those instances, when there's not that body, obviously it's gonna go to the one body who has, kind of ultimate authority of the county, which is gonna be the county council. So, yeah.
Because if it was gonna get litigated, they're not suing us.
No.
They're suing the county.
Right.
So it'd have to be a county decision.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
And since you raised that, I just want to confirm that the ordinance says the board has to approve a transfer from the grantee to an eligible recipient, or the grantee who received the grant can transfer to an eligible recipient with the approval of the board. But once that is approved, that new entity that holds the conservation easement or owns the fee simple does not have to come back to the board if there's a subsequent transfer.
Because we don't have a grant agreement with that subsequent owner. Only with the first. And
I
this
think
is
the way this is
really-
written, I think that it may only extend to one transfer.
Okay?
But again, and that's the ordinance, that's y'all's approval process, things that are a conservation easement that runs with the land is gonna run with the land. It's not gonna be extinguished.
It's really
by a
only gonna
decision y'all
apply to
make.
these fee simples prior to the requirement to have a conservation easement.
Right.
That's where this is only gonna come up.
And I wanna,
Well-
I'm not backtracking on anything, I just wanna make sure that y'all are clear, because you don't come back later and say, hey, David told us this. Board and commission members certainly do get named in lawsuits. So, you can get sued. That doesn't mean that you're properly sued and you wouldn't get dismissed, because you would. As you know, as attorneys, you can get sued for good reasons, bad reasons, no reasons. Anyone can. And if they're frustrated with a decision you'll make, certainly, I've seen board and commission members get named in a lawsuit. You can just get them dismissed because they're not proper parties. So.
Well, looping back to the question, and this is how it, in my mind, relates to the original question, which was 20 years from now, monitoring a property that is subject to the conservation restrictions, whether it's a conservation easement or fee simple, that we made the grant. If there have been subsequent transfers after that first one, the board won't know about it. And for example, so I guess it would just require, well, it's two separate things. The entity that held the conservation easement would no longer be required to tell the board if there was a violation. With the fee simple, then it would be necessary to just do the title search to find out who owned it if for some reason the board learned of a violation. But with the conservation,
With the conservation easement, it's gonna be there, and then that's why I recommend, if you're gonna go that route, that's in place, conservation easements are in place. You don't necessarily need to be a body that's approving every transfer down the road, particularly if you've got a conservation easement in place which has memorialized what you want to have done in the future. So if they transfer it to XYZ, it's not gonna matter if that conservation easement is in place. That conservation easement is going to be something that's enforceable. Again, yes, certainly it's a matter of policing, but everybody deals with that. Easements, deal with them all the time. They encumber land, they make transfers, I don't wanna say more difficult, but the transfers are subject to those. That's why the value of land subject to a conservation easement is altered, because it, reduces the ways you can use the land. So,
Well, let me be concrete about, because this goes back to Andy's enforcement action. Let's say Soil and Water was the grantee and they hold the conservation easement. Then they transfer it, the conservation easement, to Upstate Forever, for whatever reason. They're too busy to monitor and, they have budget cuts. And that's approved by the board, because that's the first transfer of the conservation easement, the property interest that we made the grant for. Then Upstate Forever, for whatever reason, decides that they're going to transfer it to the Chattooga Conservancy, which would be an eligible recipient, and they could do that, but the board would have no knowledge of it. So to Andy's question about first, yes, the board has the power to enforce, but we might not know of the violation unless one of the members happened to know about it, or maybe it was really public. The Chattooga Conservancy would be doing an enforcement action, one would assume, because they're a certified land trust, and they're monitoring regularly, but the board might not know.
Well, that's why we need to make sure that our ordinance requires that when there is a conservation easement, that annual monitoring report that has to be done per the conservation easement, not our requirement. I mean, that's an IRS requirement, I believe, that we get a copy of those every year. That's required. That's how we're gonna know. I mean, most likely, unless you live next door to them or you know somebody that does and they see it.
Well,
We'll get those monitoring reports at least. And then we'll know that there's been a transfer at least.
and
Because it'll now come from Chattooga Conservancy instead of Upstate Forever.
Madam Chair, you could, of course, ensure that's written in the conservation easement. Problem with that, or with any, I guess, of these is three county council meetings from now, and I'm not saying this is on anyone's agenda, the OCCB could be gone, because it just can be, county council can say, hey, no more. We don't need the OCCB anymore. So that would be problematic if it's, if it's somehow written in there, memorialized as it runs with the land, and someone's has a requirement in the conservation easement, or otherwise it's a document that's running with the land to get OCCB approval, and OCCB doesn't exist. So, I mean, it's just something.
The monitoring reports, you're not approving those, you're just getting.
I'm
Right.
just talking
Maybe
about
never-
the transfer issues.
But I mean, still,
but
it's gotta go to somebody in the county. I mean, even
No.
if we're not here,
let,
the county's still
let
got
me
a vested
interject.
interest.
Let me interject something. I have concerns, particularly where right now we have nobody in the county who can even do annual monitoring.
Yep,
And the
understood.
board members, I think in 5 years, they see these come through in 20 years, they don't look at them, they knock them off. Check, it was received as required, and they don't look at them. Maybe if there's an attorney on the board who works with conservation easements and has a particular interest, but I just think as a practical matter, and I have seen this in, well, that's just based on experience, I don't need to wander off the road there, but that is a concern for me.
No, and I think that'll always be a concern, and there may never be, monitoring or, will or policy or staff, but maybe there's an intern in there working in whatever office those things are stacked in, and they look at it and say, look at this, something's crazy going on here. You never know. I mean, it would be, I think, irresponsible for us not to have those. Whether they're looked at or not, we gotta have them, those monitoring reports, because we've spent $80,000 or $66,000. We have a responsibility to know throughout time, in my opinion. And so if they just stack up, okay, but how else, I mean, that's the only way we actually can know that it's in our files, and so we should do that, that's my opinion.
This isn't something you have to reinvent the wheel on necessarily. I mean, y'all aren't the only conservation board in the state or the southeast, or I don't know if there's other jurisdictions that have laid down something that's worked.
Yeah. Okay, I'll check that.
Andy, would you like to check?
Yeah, okay. So, on the next agenda, Andy's going to report on how other conservation, bank boards deal with, the issue of long-term enforcement. And if I can ask you another question, would there be any kind of argument if the board received the monitoring reports and it failed to notice that there was a violation and take action down, and then 5 years later kind of woke up and went, oh, and it's been there for 5 years and there have been reports that said it was there? Would there be any legal argument that would preclude the board from, or the county, it would be the county, not the board, but if they had known about it for a number of years from taking an action? Do you think that that's?
Yeah, there could be a statute of limitations argument or a lashes argument that comes into play.
Yes.
And it could potentially create a cause of action with some other third party who's saying, county, why are you sitting on your hands on this? Potentially.
Yeah.
But yes, there are ramifications.
It's a complex question.
It is.
So-
Fancy words, it just means we've waited too long.
Okay, well, obviously, whatever the report is, we will think long and hard and talk to you extensively before we ask for any ordinance change. Any other questions?
Thanks for your time, Becky.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the update regarding the Whetstone Hill property.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I haven't met any of you all until this morning, I don't think, in person. My name is Frank Holloman. I'm the volunteer chair of the board, or president of the board of Natural Land Trust. I'm a native of Seneca and a graduate of Seneca High School. My wife is a native of the metropolis called Conneross. And we own the farm at the corner of Hess Highway and Highway 183 where she grew up. In fact, she's over there today, spends a lot of time there. Part of the reason we're involved in Oconee County is my deep roots. It used to be, I looked and I didn't see it here, but it used to be in the old courthouse. It was a frame of the first tax receipt for Oconee County when it was created in 1868, and that's signed by my great-grandfather, who was the first treasurer of Oconee County. And I was talking with Mr. Walker. My uncle was the superintendent of schools in Oakway, and my grandfather was a mayor of Walhalla, and my aunt was a mayor of Seneca. And my cousins still live here. Some cousins still live here. So, oh, and I always have to say this: one of my ancestors was one of the founders of Bethel Presbyterian Church, where we have the Sharp reunion every year. So that's me, and that's one of my interests in Oconee County. But our organization, I'd like to introduce you to also, since this is our first time to present to you. Natural Land Trust is now 50 years old. It's the second oldest land trust in South Carolina. Our founder, who's now passed away, Tommy White, created it to protect South Carolina's Blue Ridge Mountains. We now say we protect the mountains and the Piedmont, special places in the Piedmont. He was probably the brains behind the creation of the Jocassee Gorges Natural Area, and was one of those people who helped promote the Wild and Scenic River for the status for the Chattooga River. In recent years, we led the effort to protect the Stumphouse Mountain area, if you all remember that year-long campaign in 2005-06, and that ended up acquiring and protecting Issaquena Falls, which was on private property. People didn't realize that. The Walhalla City Park, Blue Ridge Railroad rail line, and the other two tunnels We obtained the grant funding for Charam County Park to be twice expanded. The most recent one was the acquisition of Chaga Heights. We acquired and transferred to the state park system Oconee Town, the site of the Cherokee Village, after which the county was named, next to the Oconee Station. In recent years, we've acquired 500 acres of Oconee Bell habitat south of Lake Jocassee when it was threatened by development. We recently acquired part of Burrell's Place, if you all remember the old saloon above the state park, but the part that had the headwaters of a brook trout stream, which had been degraded. We acquired that, removed all the derelict buildings, worked to remove the dam, and now that stream is being restored to a brook trout stream, which it originally was. And there aren't many of those left on planet Earth, and certainly not in South Carolina. And we recently, in the past 5 or 6 years, acquired the headwaters of the Chaga River at the Spy Rock property and got it to the Forest Service. So I'd say that by background, we have a long, deep history in trying to protect special places here. So we undertook, I'm here to give you an update on the Lyles property. This is a property in Mountain Rest, or Long Creek, it's right on the line. And we had an interest in it because it had been for sale for some time. It was an old-timey family, the Lyles family had been up there for years, but now this was in the family, and the father died, and it was up for sale by the estate. Our interest in it, really, from a conservation viewpoint, was its connection to the National Forest. It is adjacent to the National Forest. In addition, Whetstone Creek runs beside it, and Whetstone Creek is the principal tributary of the Chaga River in South Carolina. It's also probably the most polluted stream that flows in the Chattooga River, so we were hoping by starting protection along Whetstone Creek, we'd gradually address that issue. So the goal from the beginning was to add this to the National Forest. That was the way it would be protected. And thanks, one thing I might mention is our board vice chair, when the Duke negotiations were going on, was one of the moving forces to create an Oconee Conservation Bank modeled on the state bank. So once we got started in this, we thought it'd be a great thing to partner with the Oconee County Conservation Bank. Ultimately, the way things worked out, the grant was transferred to us from Upstate Favor, that's sort of in the past. And it was, the intended purpose was to get this grant to assist in getting this property to the Forest Service. Okay. These transactions are never easy. There are always personalities and rules and regulations and other things involved. So we've been working with the Forest Service for now more than 2 years, I guess, to get this transit. They don't move quickly, but they move effectively over time, but it's slow. And so recently, Mac and I, this is our executive director, Mac Stone, we're an all-volunteer organization except one executive director. This is our infrastructure and our massive bureaucracy right here. So Mac and I were on a Zoom call with like 6 or more property people with the Forest Service in the last 2 weeks. And what they told us is that this transfer cannot occur to the Forest Service with the Oconee County grant in place. It will not, they can't accept a property with those kind of restrictions, and it won't happen. But the good news is, it can happen, and we can, the only way we can make this happen is we will refund to the bank, the grant, $66,100 to the bank, and then we can achieve the transfer to the Forest Service so that the intended conservation goal, which was the purpose we all had to begin with, will occur, and the bank will have $66,100 more to spend on other conservation. So we wanted to come and explain.
You're giving us.
Giving you money, and we're going to accomplish a goal we all wanted to accomplish. But we wanted, this is an unusual situation, it's one we didn't contemplate at the beginning, but that's where we are. And we will get it to the Forest Service. It will be protected as intended. And the bank will get $66,100 back. And that's where we are. We want to give you an update.
If I can jump in, I have one question for you and then one for Mr. Root. My question for you is, I'm assuming, I want to make sure that my assumption is correct, that Natural Lands Trust's attorney has figured out the appropriate mechanism for removing that language that is in the deed, should that go forward?
Yes.
Okay. And my question for Mr. Root is, do you need to come back to the board to give us legal advice on whether or not this is something the board can do?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a two-part question, or two-part answer to your question. So we have an update on, the first is the Freedom of Information Act issues that are salient to this. You have an update on West Stone Hill property. There's gonna be people who are interested, I assume, in this decision. If it is, I think Mr. Holloman and Mr. Stone and I talked last week. At that point, I understood Mr. Holloman's position to be that board approval wasn't required if they refunded the position. I'm not sure if he's altered that stance or not, so I don't know that it's a request for y'all to vote. To the extent that it's a transfer from an eligible recipient to an eligible recipient, which is the case here, that would, in my opinion, trigger is 2-405D, where you do have the majority vote. That, I think, would have to be properly noticed on the agenda to comply with FOIA. If it's just, the update that Mr. Holloman's giving, he's gonna give the check back and y'all figure out what you're gonna do from there, then that's what we said. But if it's a request for your vote, I think it'd be, for FOIA purposes, it needs to be on a subsequent meeting agenda. It can be a special called meeting to get it done more quickly. So the public has a notice and opportunity to hear and participate if they, to the extent they want to, so you have input on your vote. Secondarily, as part of that, we would have an executive session item, so we could go in and you could receive legal advice in relation to it. Is that responsive?
Yes, it is.
We would have an executive session with you.
With,
Correct.
yes.
Okay. All right, so, I mean, I'm certain our ordinance doesn't have black and white language that says you can take it back.
There's no give it back language. I think the things that are in place, without getting too far into what I might say in executive session, the things that are in place here, or the issues that are in place here is, you have an eligible recipient transferring to an eligible recipient. Section 2-405D requires board approval for that. That was in the ordinance prior to this transfer acquisition by Natural Land, so I think that's in play. The second issue is that this as Mr. Holman noted, this has been contemplated though throughout. So I'm looking at the ratification of modification to the grant application and grant approval, which, signed by all the important or relevant parties to this, and notes the 2019 OCCB approval to Upstate Forever for the application to purchase this property, the grant of $66,000 by the board. And then it says, as described in the grant application, the Natural Land Trust has negotiated a tentative purchase agreement with the United States Forest Service to eventually transfer the property to the Forest Service for inclusion in the National Forest, Andrew Pickens District. However, the USFS will not accept properties that are encumbered by a conservation easement. So the purpose of this letter/agreement is to ratify the change in plans for the permanent conservation of the property and to approve the transfer of the property without the requirement that Upstate Forever, the Natural Land Trust, or the state of William D. Lyles place a conservation easement on the property. The OCC, and then the only other requirement in it, the OCCB will require that Natural Land Trust enter into a grant agreement with the board to address the contingency that the proposed transfer to the Forest Service does not occur. That's not what you're talking about here. So to the extent you're talking about D language, grant language, anything that might have an ambiguity, and if you're talking about the lack of a black or white, obviously you're gonna go outside those documents to see what the intent of the parties were. I think the intent of the parties is all along was that this transfer is gonna take place. So those are the relevant talking points that we would address in the executive session if it gets to a matter of the board approving it.
Okay.
And just so you know, but the grant agreement says that we are to indemnify the board, you all, if the grant cannot be used for its intended purpose. And this is what we were trying to do all along, and the Forest Service says as long as this is in place, we can't transfer the property to them. So that's our point, is that we're gonna return the funds, we're gonna achieve the same goal we all wanted to in the first place, without the county having to spend any money, or the board spending any of its money. It can be used for another purpose, and the goal will be achieved. So in other words, we're accomplishing the intent and the written goal. And then, as we understand what we're supposed to do on the grant, and we do it anyway, but what we should do under the grant agreement, give the money back, and that's, since the grant can't be used for its intended purpose, that frees the property from the grant, and then we'll get it to the Forest Service as we all intended to in the first place.
Right, well, we have a good relationship with the Natural Land Trust, and we think you do a really great job. We've never given a grant to the Forest Service. And there might be mixed feelings about the Forest Service's record on conservation. So that's the concern, of course, is who is that next eligible recipient? Even though they're eligible, do you like them or not? And I guess I would go with just the curious question of any idea what the Forest Service might do with that 154
No,
acres?
as you know, no, I don't know specifically, other than I know in general how the Forest Service operates. The advantage, of course, getting into the national the overall conservation goal, of course, is to prevent the property from being developed and have the conservation values of the property preserved. And that, in general, is what happens when property is within the Forest Service. It doesn't get developed for subdivisions or industrial use, et cetera. It's managed for natural resources. The advantage, you can never control every detail of life. The advantage of it being in the national forest is they are subject to all the different statutory and regulatory restrictions on their management decisions. They have to come out with a forestry management plan. It's subject to public comment. It's subject to challenge. They have to go through the National Environmental Policy Act. If they do any changes. So in general, what I would say is it's not going to be harmfully developed. I suspect over time, as they do most of their property, they'll manage it for timber. Part of this property is a planted pine plantation. It was planted to be, I know the prior owner, they planted it to be harvested over time appropriately, and they've been thinning it and treating it, et cetera, and I suspect the Forest Service will do that too. Beyond that, it'll be just as if it were part of a national park or wildlife refuge or a state park. It'll be managed according to the process of that natural resource institution.
My concern is, and it's a personal concern. I've worked in the environmental field and seen a lot of different things. And Ryan and I did the inspection there, and I got a really good handle of that property. And a lot of that property is, I think it's very special because of the water on it. It's got a lot of water on it and around it.
Right.
And bordering it. The Forest Service may need a new maintenance shed, big one, the
It's an
forest.
unlikely place for it.
It's true, that's correct, but that's the
And they
fear.
would have to comply
Yeah.
with the Clean
Yeah.
Water Act and Section 404. The Forest Service would be very reluctant to impact a wetland, I think, as compared to private owner, for example.
The things being local, in here, I've had probably 3 separate people ask, knowing that I'm on this board, am I aware that there's discussion about a potential dove field? Because they lost a dove field over in, I think it's Choey Valley. Of course, I don't know, I mean, I'm not speaking with, but there was a South Carolina DNR guy that he handles the dove fields that had been out there, and it did cause a lot of concern from some of the local property owners about potential stream, specifically Whetstone. And I have to say, it did give me some concern because it made sense. I mean, it's been used as a cornfield, and I think in my opinion, that was a potential, I mean, that kind of scared me, like how that would be viewed on us and what we're trying to do. And then, but there's anybody I ask, it's like, oh, no, that's not, but then I'm kind of like, well, why are they?
Well, see, I mean, let's just back up for a minute. I'll tell you my view on doing conservation for all these years. None of us in this room can control the universe going forward. The question was how, in this instance, you had a piece of property that has all these special characteristics. It could be bought for any purpose. And, it could have been filled. I mean, a private party, they can get a permit to fill wetlands, as you well know. It may also, by the way, be, we're not sure, nobody's sure, it may be the site of a Cherokee village. And that if it's in public ownership, at some point that archaeology can be done. But it could have been developed for any purpose, chicken house, who knows what. And that would be gone forever. So what public use it might be put to in the future? I mean, first of all, the main issue here was not that we're going to be able to manage every little detail of how this might be handled by a public resource agency in the future, given all the different issues that may be present 10 or 15 or 20 or 50 years from now. But how are we going to ensure it does not get lost forever and instead is in a natural resource conservation state? That's all we can really do in an imperfect world. And so that's the main thing, A. B, in terms of if it's water quality is an issue, I can tell you, the problem there is land management on Whetstone Creek, particularly cattle, is not an issue of buckshot. I mean, if that was an issue, we could all go to bed with Whetstone Creek. That's not the issue. The issue is what's happening on the land right there. But we have not, to my knowledge, we certainly have not permitted, leased it for dove hunting. I personally don't know the process of the Forest Service, but I'm not aware of the Forest Service ever. Maybe they do dove hunting sites, I don't know. That would be, if it's in public ownership, then the public has an access way to influence that. That's the advantage of this. I mean, if we own it, we can put a dove field on there tomorrow. There's not one thing they can do about it. I mean, it's, there's not one thing anybody
I'm
can
just
do about it.
relaying questions
Yeah.
from people I've known my whole
Right,
life. It's
right.
in our backyard, and it concerned me because this is, yes, you're from here, but you don't live here, and all we're funding is in Oconee County. So to me, I take it personal because I really know, I'm dealing. So that I was just a little confused on why we were getting mixed messages. That's the only. And I know we
Yes.
can't control it.
Right, I think we all made this decision's been made. When we all made the decision, we try to acquire a piece of property, protect a piece of property by the way it's gonna be protected and the conservation solution was get it to the Forest Service. So that, we made that decision. And, if there's some question, I don't always agree with the Forest. I don't have many interactions with the Forest Service, management, but I don't know, what I've seen in North Carolina, sometimes I disagree with what they're doing up there, and sometimes I agree with it. But the public does have input into that.
So,
I'm not aware, but the short answer is I'm not aware of any dove field.
of the percentage of lands that property y'all transferred in your 50 years, what percentage do you hold? Do you maintain?
Well, a very small percentage. I'll tell you why that's hard to say. We own currently, say in the last 5 or 6 years, somewhere between 8 and 10,000 acres. But that changes all the time because, for example, we've acquired 100 and some acres now we own next to Paris Mountain State Park. But that's intended, that's going to the state park system, that's going to be gone. So the advantage of Natural Land Trust is, one advantage is the state agencies and the county agencies and the federal agencies cannot act quickly. So for example, this property comes up for sale, chicken house can get put on that, or, dove, whatever, could be put on that and developed. Well, the Forest Service, it takes them 2, 3 years to process this. They could not do that, and the owners don't want to sit around. So we can come in and buy it, hold it, and then transfer it to them in due course. So, but see, it all depends. For example, Tommy Watches, I said I probably understated it. He was significantly responsible for Joe Cassie Gorges. We never owned any of that, but that's thousands of acres that we never owned. So it would be a tiny percentage. It's just, we've always got some significant holdings, and some we are holding long-term, 2 or 3 or 4,000.
Intentionally for your own maintenance and.
Or because, for several reasons. In one instance, one property we own in Pickens, the grant doesn't allow it to go to a state agency.
Okay.
Normally, we try to get things to a long-term management agency for the reason you all just gave, that we don't have a big staff to manage thousands of acres, so we try to get it to an agency that has that kind of budget over time. Secondly, sometimes if we have been given property or owned it historically, we hold it until we can use it as match to obtain another grant. So for example, maybe there's federal grant money available to add property to Oconee State Park, but it's got to be matched dollar for dollar. One way we might match that would be by donating some other piece of property to the state park or to DNR, and that would provide the match. And we hold property for that possibility going forward, and we are giving. Right now, it's property to Jones Gap State Park as part of a grant that acquires other property. So,
It's a great model. I mean, it really
yeah,
is.
so we're moving,
It's
you know.
wonderful.
Yeah.
I think the South Carolina Conservation Bank, that they are prescribed from making grant. I mean, the U.S. Forest Service can't be an eligible
Correct.
recipient for them.
correct.
And I wonder why that is.
Well, you know, originally, counties couldn't get money from the Conservation Bank. When the Conservation Bank Act was passed, counties were excluded as well as the federal government. I don't know why, I bet some legislator had some bad I'm guessing, I don't know, there might be some other reason, but they cut them out. Now they've been added back in. Counties now can receive funding. So my guess is, I don't know.
know
I have no
Raleigh-
idea.
Raleigh doesn't like that. He would like
Right.
that.
See, you know, the Ace Basin, which is the great South Carolina conservation accomplishment, significant parts of that are federally added properties, and they have state properties around it. But I don't know why, really.
Thank you, Mr. Holloman. Appreciate it.
Are there any other questions? Okay. Well, Mr. Holloman, before you sit down,
Sure.
I want to make sure that I have understood why you're here today, which is, my understanding from this is it was both to provide information, but also to request approval of the transfer and approval of either that the grant agreement be either rescinded or vacated, whichever would be appropriate, and the money returned to the board, that the board could accept it. Is that correct?
Well, it's not exactly correct, so let me
Okay.
say why. First of all, one reason is we're all part of the same movement, we're all friends, even though a lot of us have never met in person before. We wanted to give you and furthermore, you made a grant, so we wanted to let you know that happened. And we had this significant development that we gotta deal with, so we wanted to let you know and have a chance to answer questions, that's one. We thought about writing a letter, we talked with David, but I thought, no, since y'all were meeting, let's go talk and explain it, so that's one. Number two, I think it would be helpful for you all to approve it, so there'd be no doubt everything would be clear. But I told David, I don't think, it's my view, our grant agreement requires approval for two reasons. One is, as I said before, the very first, I think it's the very first provision of the agreement says if your grant cannot be used to achieve its intended purpose, permanent conservation solution, which here we go to the Forest Service, we're supposed to give the grant back. And that means things
Does-
are over.
Does it say they're supposed to give the money back?
Yes.
It
Yeah,
does.
it's- That's the indemnity provision. If you can't
Yeah.
uphold the terms of the grant agreement that they are
Okay,
to
so,
indemnify the county, OCCB to the extent it's
okay,
involved,
so
up
the
to the amount of
question,
the grant, which is 60, yeah.
so the question of does the board have the authority to vacate or rescind, whichever would be the appropriate, I guess in this term it would be vacate the grant and accept the funds back, is answered in that agreement.
Yeah, I don't even think it's a matter of vacating or rescinding the grant agreement. I think, Shulman could certainly tell me if I'm wrong, the way I envision this, he's wanting to get your approval as a matter of comity, but if y'all were to say, you know, when you have the vote, and you vote against it, you're gonna get your check back, because they gotta transfer the property to the Forest Service, and he's gonna rely on the grant agreement that says, all right, the amount of damages to the extent that, because, you know, we're not doing this the way you want to do it, is limited to the amount of the grant, $66,000, and we gave that back to y'all. So,
That's
Like I
not
said-
our situation, though.
I'm saying that's where I'm envisioning that it play out. No, we're sitting here right now trying to talk out, you know, how it's gonna work out.
I mean, this subsequent transaction of giving it back is not occurring because well, I guess it is because the Forest Service wanted.
They
it.
say we can't do it unless we get out from under the grant.
Okay.
The second thing, just so you know, so I'm laying all the cards on the table, our grant agreement doesn't say that the board approves a transfer. Our grant agreement says the board can veto a transfer if it is not achieving the intended conservation purpose, something to that effect. And here, we're doing, the first point is, we think when we follow the agreement, refund the money, because we can't do it otherwise, that's the end of the day. But if you think the agreement still somehow hangs around even after we return the money, we think we're doing what everybody wanted to do, so there's no basis for vetoing the transaction. Now, if we were transferring it to my cousin, your cousin, or somebody for a vacation
My
home,
cousin.
that'd be your cousin. You know, it'd be a different argument, but that's not what's happening here. But in any event, I guess what, as David said, is a matter of comedy or goodwill, et cetera. I think it would be helpful if you all approve it, and there wouldn't be any question, blah, blah, blah.
Well, those are our questions to discuss.
Okay, well, with the understanding that your position is that it would be helpful if we
Yes,
approved it.
correct.
Then, and for us to take that vote, we cannot do it today.
Yes.
It would have to be at our
Sure.
April 4th meeting. So I would, I don't know, does the board need to vote that we will put this on the agenda? Consideration of the transfer of the Whetstone Hill property from Natural Land Trust to the Forest Service.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
I mean, how long would an executive session take? Like, is it out of the question to do it today?
And been noticed.
Okay, I don't know how all this works, I'm just like,
I was just talking about for the Freedom of Information Act purposes, the law, state law is very strict on
okay,
how public bodies can operate and giving the public notice of everything, so.
okay.
So the vote and, the executive session, to the extent it's needed, would be done at the same time as the vote. And, I believe the chair can just put things unilaterally on the agenda. I don't think you have to have a vote to do that. You may want to, the power. Chair, you may want, I don't know, if you're gonna have an earlier meeting, I don't know what Natural Land's needs are time-wise.
Our next next meeting's April 4th.
Yes.
I can assure you the Forest Service is not gonna be acting before April 4th.
So that's okay. I mean, make a request for a,
Or am I wrong on that?
They won't act, but our due diligence to get things moving. I mean, if you could discuss this before that, it'd be wonderful. If not, it's not a problem.
thank you.
I would like to request if we could see, could we get a copy of y'all's agreement with us?
Yeah,
yes.
it's recorded
have
in
it.
the courthouse, David.
Okay.
Okay, so,
One note to that, when you read it, it references that modification agreement that I read portions of. So it's just something to consider as you're thinking about folks in the public who may talk to you about it. These things were all talked about by the board. I know the board may have a different makeup now, but at the time this was approved. So
okay,
So we don't have, the modification agreement's not part of our public record, is it?
you signed it. I'm assuming it's part of this, I don't know,
but,
probably where I got it from.
yeah, I believe. Jennifer, first, could you, for the next for whatever meeting we consider this, would you be sure and include, that grant agreement and modification, whatever it's called, in the backup material? So all the board members will have it in time to look at it before the meeting. Thank you, Scott. The next thing is, I'm going to take Mac's statement that it would be wonderful to have an earlier decision as a request for us to have a called meeting prior to April 4th. So with that in mind, folks, let's look at our calendars and see if we can get a quorum for an earlier date. And Jennifer, if I'm correct, are Tuesdays the best day for you? Because I know your schedule is sometimes horrible.
The first and third Tuesday of every month is council.
Okay,
Is that good or bad?
That's not good.
Is on what that agenda looks like.
I won't say for her is bad. It's
I
not
was
good.
gonna say, that's bad.
Like it
So
is.
we ended,
Second
did we
and
end up with all of our meetings on the first Tuesday?
No, not all of them, a few of them, but not all.
Just a few, and I looked at it to make sure I would be okay, but.
Yeah, I tried to ask, that's the reason I asked you to propose dates. Okay, so looking at our calendars, we don't want to do the first or third Tuesday of February. Of course, this is the first, so that one's out. So that leaves us the 9th, 16th, or 2nd, the 2nd of March is a possibility. And it's not for me, so let's look at, so Scuddy would have to chair it. Then we have March 9th.
It's Thursday.
We don't want to do that. I'm sorry. The dates on my calendar, let's start back up. The dates on my calendar that are available are February 10. Thank you, y'all, for keeping me. I start thinking too fast and get myself confused. February 10, February 15, February 17, February 20. And then in March, we have March 8, March 10.
These are Tuesdays and Thursdays?
Yeah.
These are Wednesdays and Fridays. These are not the days that,
Why don't we keep it on a Tuesday?
keep it on a Tuesday, but not
But
a,
on the,
Yeah.
okay. So going back, that would be, Jennifer, would you tell us
Let's
the
do
Tuesdays
late-
that are not?
let her give
The
us,
14th and the 28th of February.
yeah.
Okay,
And in March, it would be the 14th and 28th.
okay, so,
Nothing says Valentine's Day like a
oh, yes.
meeting here.
I vote we do it March 14th,
Okay,
personally.
you're making a motion to do
Yeah.
it, March 14th?
I'll second that.
And so it gives us time to look over everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so Scott has made a motion for March 14th. Andy has made a second. Do we have any more discussion? Scotty, you're available?
It's till 9:00.
Yes, it would still be at 9 o'clock?
Yep.
Yes, okay,
Goes well, yeah.
okay. No further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. We will meet on March the 14th for the purpose of considering the Whetstone Hill property transfer.
Thank you.
And,
Madam Chair, we won't plan to be here unless you want, if you want us to be here, we'll be here. But we, we'll leave that up to you, what you want. We won't seek to intrude on your meeting. But if you wanted, I realize we can't be in the executive session, but if you wanted us here in case you had you want to come out and ask us a
I would say
question.
right now, we probably would want.
I would
Okay.
think we would want,
We're the only people we can talk to.
But I say this involves you, so.
Okay,
yeah,
so March
yeah,
14th.
you or Mac or
Yeah.
whomever you would want here. I believe that would be
Okay.
appropriate.
Good.
And of course, you'll put the executive session on the meeting. Thank you, Jennifer. And I think that concludes this.
Thank you very
Agenda.
much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Nice to
Thank
meet
you.
you.
Great presentation.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, can I jump back to my duty station over
Yes.
there?
Thank you so much for coming today. We appreciate
Good
it.
to see you, man.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Okay, the next agenda item, the first one under discussion is the Grant 003, grant procedures, based on the advice of Mr. Root. I am suggesting that we not consider that grant today, that policy today. I think I said grant 003, I meant policy.
For the whole shall and thing.
Yes, to look at that
That's great.
and to also look at whether or not still have in it things that are set out so precisely in the ordinance that it is unnecessary to include them.
Okay.
And actually, if we could have a motion, since the same thing applies to the policy 005, if I could have a motion to defer action on policy 003 and 005 to the April meeting.
I move that we
Yeah.
defer discussion
Okay.
and action regarding revision of policy 003 and 005 to the April 14th.
Okay,
I'll second that.
okay. Motion by Andy, a second by Scott. Any more discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, it passed unanimously. The next discussion item is the Agricultural Task Force, which I am representing the Conservation Board on that. The final report will be going to County Council, I believe, for the March 2nd County Council. Is there a County Council meeting on March 2nd? What?
March 7th.
7th.
March 7th.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. For some reason, Jennifer, I had a note in my, that it was going to be March 3rd, which obviously is wrong since that's a Friday. That's not going to happen then. But I'm assuming that that was my Scrivener's error. It's going to be presented on March 7th. It will be available to everyone through the backup materials, approximately a week before?
Usually the Thursday before.
Okay. So I would encourage everyone to pull that up and look at it. There is going to be, specifically related to the OCCB, there will be recommendations, I believe, for some funding for the OCB to issue grants to farmland, for farm purposes. That is, but again, that is not a final. That is just what I anticipate may be included in the final task force report. There are many other things that are of interest. Since the county council will not receive it until the 7th of March, there has been, I have heard some support for the idea of anyone who wants to comment on it to come to the next county council meeting to comment after the county council has had an opportunity to review it. However, anyone who wanted to comment on the 7th of March certainly could. The reason I am giving y'all that information is because I think it is important that everyone on this board talk to people they know in the conservation community and the farming community and the folks dealing with the Food Council, although Food Council is represented on the committee, and I'm sure they'll be getting the word out. But the idea is spread the news that this is coming out there. Let's get people to read it and comment to the council. I would hope that people will be interested in supporting the various recommendations. There are going to be several recommendations, and not just related to the OCCB. And I think it's very important that the communities that could be affected by this, which is essentially everyone in Oconee County who eats food, should be looking at this, and that it behooves us all to get this information. Let people know that this is an opportunity for the council to start moving forward with a variety of ideas.
And Emily, you said one of the potential recommendations was funding for OCCB for ag purposes. And what were the other ones that you said? You said one before that. What was that? I'm sorry.
I don't remember seeing one before that. I don't remember them all off the top of my head.
Right.
I know that, I believe, I shouldn't say I know anything at this point. I believe that that there is in the draft that we're going to be reviewing a recommendation related to voluntary agricultural districts. And I'm sorry, we have looked at so many different things that I just don't have the list
Okay,
at the
that's
top
all
of
right.
my head.
Just checking.
And which ones went in and which ones didn't.
Okay.
I have to sit down and look at it. And that's what I'll be doing. I'll be sitting down and looking at it again and thinking through some stuff.
Okay.
But, and the report will look very thick, frankly, because there's a lot of supporting documentation for the council to explain some of the things. But the executive summary at the beginning is not very long. What the actual recommendations are, it's easy to look at, it's easy to read, and then if there's something that you don't understand, the supporting, for example, if someone doesn't understand voluntary agricultural districts, there should be supporting documentation behind it that explains that.
So
And-
how's the producer, farmer representation and involvement with the task force been?
Farm Bureau is on it, and, a couple more.
But actual farmers?
Yes, Natalie's on it as the Food Council, but she's a farmer. The head of Farm Bureau is a farmer. The Planning Commission's on it.
Farm Bureau is an insurance
What?
company. Farm Bureau is an insurance company.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's
That's a-
right. But isn't the head of Farm Bureau? No, okay. Well,
A
maybe
lot of
it's,
farmers have Farm Bureau insurance,
Yeah.
but they're a business. I mean,
well, it's somebody else I'm thinking about. I'm thinking in terms of the table and how we sit and usually sit and who represents what, and golly. I don't remember. Do you remember? Because you might have drafted the ordinance for Paul. No? I don't
You have a
know.
list of them?
Somebody is.
yeah, if I saw a list of the members, I can tell you who's.
Yeah, and I don't have it with me. Look, shouldn't it be online? Because our meetings are public. Yes, there might be someone from the Cattlemen's Association. But maybe not. I know we discussed, I'm sorry.
I just saw.
Yeah.
I didn't wanna plaster it over everything. Natalie Arnold, Bob Winchester, Stanley Gibson.
Hang on,
Stanley-
hang on. Can you print that list? I mean,
The Arnold folks are farmers.
Huh?
That's, they're farmers.
Yeah, that's Natalie, right? That's Natalie, Bob Winchester.
Stanley Gibson,
Yep, he's a
Who
cattleman.
Gibson?
Stanley,
I think he's a
Stanley.
he has cattle.
Yeah, I was gonna say, he's a farmer, right?
Kim Alexander,
Yeah.
and Mr. Frankie Pearson.
Are the farmers?
No, those are the people on it, and me.
Kim does rodeos.
Six members?
1,
Right.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
There's also Councilman, or former Councilman, Mr. Kane, and Ms. Brock.
And they are not members, they are not voting members, they are, what are they called? I don't know.
Liaisons. staff
Yeah,
liaisons.
liaisons or
Natalie
something.
Arnold, Emily Hitchcock, Bob Winchester,
Uh-huh,
Stanley Gibson, Kim Alexander, Frank Pearson.
Yes.
Those
Yeah.
are the members of the
Yeah.
Yes.
chapter. Okay, thanks.
so,
Okay, thanks.
okay,
Thank-
thank you.
Thank you.
So, the only other thing I want to remind everyone before I take a motion to adjourn is that our next meeting is March 14th at 9 a.m. in this room. And the only thing on the agenda will be the Whetstone Hill property. With that in mind, is it appropriate, Jennifer, for you to go ahead and send all of us before the backup material that grant agreement?
Yes, I'll go see what I can find.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
That would be wonderful, and we all heard the presentation, so, and I didn't put it on the agenda, but I'm still gonna say, remember, we have 2 vacant spaces.
We need to
Let's,
get them filled.
okay. So, with that, the agenda having been concluded, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Real quick, I want to clarify. Basically, and this is, I wanted to ask y'all this. They want to be able to transfer that property because they're not able to take care of it ultimately, correct?
No, that's their MO.
Yeah.
They swoop in, buy something that may be developed, and hold it for as long as they need to before they transfer it. That's how they do business.
Yeah.
Okay.
What they are is because so often, these transactions take so long. And even if it's a private transaction, putting a conservation easement on can take a couple of years.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes, if the property's actually gonna be sold, then Natural Land Trust buys it, and it's basically a holding company until it transfers. And as they said, they have just a few properties that they are managing right now, but I think with most of them, with very few exceptions, the plan is with all of them to ultimately transfer it to someone else.
Okay.
That is, and we all knew that. Everybody that was on the board at the time this happened, and I know I was on the board by the time it closed, was aware of that.
Okay.
Kind of going back to that question.
Okay, and the second one, I live in District 1, so I wouldn't mind filling it if I could, but is there any requirements to that?
That
the
give us
vacant
more
spot.
flexibility to round up another member.
'Cause you're
It's not
now
large,
at
you can
large.
go anywhere.
They have 2 nominees right now.
We do.
Okay.
It was supposed to be on the agenda this evening for council, but that meeting has been canceled.
Okay.
So it should come up on our February 21st meeting.
February 21st? Okay, because I want to,
Why was that meeting canceled?
Mr. Mizes's mother passed and Mr. Hart's not feeling well.
Okay.
Oh,
That's it.
oh, I'm sorry to
Okay.
hear that. February 2nd, OCCB nominees. Okay, great, thank
Yeah,
you.
you think we have a hard time coming up with a quorum?
Yes. Oh. So,
I wish I
Okay.
could have talked to Mr. Hallman. He's kind of a legend in the conservation world, and
Yeah.
a lot of people I know from Seneca are like close friends with him, but I never,
yeah,
you know.
Emily, we've met him before, right? At a County Forever meeting at Chautauqua Bell for one of those farm owner breakfasts. At least I met him there.
He's very, very well connected.
he is.
Yeah.
I've talked to him on the
Secretary of
phone, but I don't think I
Education
had
or
met him.
something.
Yeah, he's, I mean, that whole stump house thing, I mean, he was a,
Okay, we're kind of,
Yes, sir.
I think this conversation
That's right.
is not necessary for the board to have at this point. And so, because this is a more personal conversation. So if I could have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion.
Okay, I have a motion and a second, so as I understand it from Frankie, that's all I need. I don't have to have a vote. We're adjourned.
Good. Way to go, Ed.